Beneath the noise of history lies another frequency, one of silence, omissions, and erased ledgers. In the shadows between battlefields and treaties, fragments of truth flicker like coded transmissions, never meant to be heard. These are the buried, corridors of war, steel doors sealed in the dark, files stamped with red ink, whispers drowned beneath oceans and snow. Step closer, and you may glimpse what was hidden, not in victories or defeats, but in the secrets neither side dared confess. In November 1942, a single Allied convoy slipped out of Iceland's Hvalfjörður naval base under freezing sleet and low cloud cover. It carried the designation Convoy FB, one of the Arctic runs meant to deliver vital food, ammunition, and tanks to the Soviet Union through the northern lifeline of Murmansk. Records list 13 merchant ships, lightly escorted, set to thread the brutal Barents Sea during the onset of polar night. By the third day of sailing, however, the convoy was no longer in communication with Allied command. No distress calls, no survivors drifting in lifeboats, not even wreckage was recovered. Within a week, the convoy was declared lost to storms and German naval activity, a tragic but not uncommon fate in Arctic waters. But as decades passed, fragments of testimony and scattered archival leaks began to suggest the disappearance was neither accident nor ordinary combat, but the product of something deliberately hidden. In 1961, Soviet naval archives declassified a slim file labeled Eisbär, German for polar bear. It contained intercepted Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs, annotated in German script, showing an unidentified Allied convoy on a northern approach not listed in Kriegsmarine logs. A handwritten note identified an experimental flotilla, believed to be a detachment of the 9th U-boat flotilla out of Bergen, equipped with magnetically fused torpedoes still in testing stages. The flotilla was described as ghost operations, functioning outside normal command structures, tasked with field testing technology against live targets in Arctic waters, where losses could be blamed on weather. These were not frontline units, but rather a clandestine strike group, operating under Reich naval intelligence orders. The reference to Convoy FB was unmistakable. Additional hints surfaced in the late 1980s, when a former NKVD archivist defected to Finland. Among the microfilms he smuggled were interrogation transcripts of captured Allied seamen, taken not in 1942 but in early 1943. The documents referenced Angliski prisoners from the Polar Sea, numbering no more than 20, allegedly transferred from German custody into Soviet hands near Arkhangelsk. Their names do not match official Allied POW rosters, and their fates vanish into the closed court records of Moscow's Lubyanka prison. What remains are cold, typewritten pages marked with interrogation notes, questions about technical cargo, shipments outside the manifest, and repeated demands for details of radar countermeasures carried aboard the convoy. The implication is unavoidable. At least part of Convoy FB's human cargo survived, only to disappear into the Soviet security machine. British files, declassified in fragments during the 1970s, add further shadows. A War Cabinet memorandum from December 1942 records frustration at the Admiralty's inability to verify or reconstruct the loss of Convoy FB. An underlined phrase notes, "Unacceptable risk of public disclosure should questions arise regarding special material consignment." No definition of that consignment has ever been made public. Naval historian Henry Probert, reviewing the papers in 1981, remarked that one is struck not only by what is written, but what has been redacted by heavy black ink across entire sections. The surviving pages indicate that the convoy carried more than simple war supplies. It was entrusted with sensitive equipment, possibly British centimetric radar components destined for Soviet study. Whether these reached Soviet hands through loss or through deliberate transfer remains unresolved. Eyewitness traces also complicate the official record. In 1944, Norwegian fishermen claimed to have seen an Allied vessel under tow by a German U-boat near the coast of Finnmark. Their testimony, dismissed as unreliable at the time, reappears in post-war oral histories collected by the Tromsø Museum. The description matches no recorded naval action, yet corresponds with the dates of Convoy FB's disappearance. If accurate, it suggests not annihilation at sea, but capture and redirection, an extraordinary feat of clandestine warfare, never admitted by either side. The geopolitical context adds another layer. In 1942, Soviet suspicions of Anglo-American motives were high, and the Western Allies themselves hesitated to share their most advanced technologies. Yet, the Soviet war effort depended heavily on Arctic convoys, and Stalin pressed hard for material support. The possibility that Britain might have used a vanished convoy as cover for a controlled transfer, handing over select equipment under the pretense of loss, remains speculative, but not impossible. It would explain both the absence of wreckage and the sudden appearance of Allied prisoners in Soviet custody, men who may have been sacrificed to secrecy. What the Germans gained, however, is equally troubling. Surviving Kriegsmarine Technical, reports indicate that by 1943, U-boats were experimenting with coatings designed to scatter or absorb Allied radar signals. This technology appears months earlier than expected, leading some researchers to suggest they tested it on Convoy FB. The convoy's silence, no successful distress calls, suggests radio jamming or communications disruption, also consistent with German experimentation at that time. If Convoy FB was targeted not simply for destruction, but for scientific trial, then its loss marks not only tragedy, but a hidden arms race conducted in frozen waters. No wrecks from Convoy FB have been found to date. The Barents Sea is unforgiving, with shifting ice and depths exceeding 300 meters. Occasional reports of oil slicks or debris have never yielded identification. Yet sonar surveys conducted in 1993 by a joint Anglo-Norwegian expedition detected several large metallic anomalies near Novaya Zemlya, consistent with ship-sized objects scuttled in deep troughs. Requests to follow up were denied by Russian authorities, citing environmental dangers and naval security considerations. The anomalies remain untouched. Today, the loss of Convoy FB stands as one of the Arctic War's unsolved mysteries. Official records blame storms and U-boat action. Allied histories often omit the convoy entirely, focusing instead on the larger, more famous PQ and JW convoys. Yet the fragments, NKVD interrogation files, German technical notes, redacted Admiralty papers suggest a darker narrative. Somewhere between Iceland and Murmansk, a convoy may have been deliberately erased, its men and cargo consumed not by war alone, but by the calculations of intelligence services on both sides. The truth remains sealed in archives still classified, or at the bottom of the Barents Sea, locked in the frozen silence of a war fought not only with weapons, but with shadows, secrets, and sacrifices no government has ever fully admitted. In June 1942, the Allied struggle to keep Malta alive reached one of its most perilous moments. The island, besieged by Axis air and naval forces, was close to starvation. Operation Harpoon was mounted as a relief convoy. 6 merchant vessels, escorted by Royal Navy carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, sailed from Gibraltar on 12th June. Every official history records its bitter fate, battered by relentless Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica strikes, pounded by Italian surface forces, and whittled down until only 2 merchant ships limped into Grand Harbour, Valletta. Yet amid the wreckage of this operation lies a detail suppressed in the surviving files. A single unmarked container, reportedly loaded aboard the aircraft carrier HMS Eagle, and vanished with her when she was torpedoed by U-73 off the coast of Algeria. The known facts are stark. On 11 June 1942, in the hours before departure, dockworkers at Gibraltar's North Mole observed a sealed steel crate, heavily guarded, transferred from a military lorry onto HMS Eagle. Witnesses later testified the crate bore no shipping markings, only the stenciled letters CWLM. Its dimensions were approximately 2 meters by 1, resembling a scientific transport container rather than a standard supply crate. Royal Navy log entries for Eagle's embarkation make no reference to it. Within 24 hours of sailing, Eagle was struck by 4 torpedoes and sank within minutes. Out of a crew of more than 100, nearly 160 men were lost. Survivors were rescued by nearby destroyers, but according to later testimony, survivors were questioned not about the loss of the ship, but about the presence and fate of a mysterious container. What the crate contained has never been admitted. Italian naval intelligence, in a report dated July 1942, discovered in Rome's archives decades later, described Allied transport of biological materials under Churchill's War Cabinet orders. The report, labelled Riservatissimo and signed by Admiral Arturo Riccardi, Commander-in-Chief of the Regia Marina, stated that Axis intelligence agents had intercepted coded transmissions between London and Gibraltar, describing a special consignment of CWL. Italian analysts speculated that CWL stood for Chemical Warfare Laboratory, linking the cargo to the top-secret British chemical weapons research facilities at Porton Down. The Regia Marina believed the container carried experimental agents intended for field trials in Malta should the Axis invasion materialize. Declassified SOE fragments add intrigue. A memorandum from June 1942, found in the National Archives at Kew, references escort personnel, SOE, Mediterranean Section, assigned to Operation Harpoon, Eagle Detachment. No names are attached, but the file notes that 2 non-naval personnel were attached to Eagle's convoy group, answerable not to the Admiralty, but directly to the War Cabinet. Their mission: monitor and safeguard consignment until arrival at Malta. Their fate is unrecorded, and their names remain absent from official rolls of the convoy. One survivor's recollection casts a longer shadow. In 1974, a retired petty officer from Eagle gave an interview to a naval historian in Portsmouth. He described seeing the mysterious container bolted to the hangar deck near the carrier's portside lift, guarded at all times by 2 armed officers. According to his account, even during air raid alarms, the guards refused to leave their post. When the torpedoes struck, he recalled glimpsing the container shift, its seals breaking as seawater flooded the deck. There was a hiss, like gas escaping, he said. The guards didn't try to save themselves, they tried to keep it down. Within moments, he was swept into the sea. This testimony was not included in official naval histories, but survives in unpublished notes. If true, the implications are disturbing. During the Second World War, both Britain and the United States maintained large stockpiles of mustard gas and other chemical agents, intended as deterrents should Germany initiate chemical warfare. The use of Malta as a base for such weapons, even experimentally, would have violated numerous international agreements. It may explain why, after the sinking of Eagle, surviving crew were reportedly segregated during debriefing. Several survivors later claimed that they were warned under the Official Secrets Act never to discuss the events of 11th or 12th June. Axis interest in the container did not end with Eagle's sinking. Italian naval records suggest that within hours of the carrier's destruction, Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft circled the area repeatedly, as if seeking evidence of cargo jettisoned before the final plunge. German U-boat logs, heavily censored after the war, reveal that U-331 was redirected toward the site but returned to La Spezia without explanation. It is possible they attempted to recover debris or the container itself, but nothing has been confirmed. The mystery re-emerged in 1965 when British divers exploring the wreck of HMS Eagle off Algeria reported seeing a large, sealed metal crate, distinct from the twisted remains of the carrier's fuel tanks and aircraft. Their report was quietly suppressed, and no official salvage operation has been authorized. In 1971, the Admiralty issued a prohibition order, declaring the wreck a war grave and restricting diving. Some suspect the order was less about respect for the dead than about preventing discovery of sensitive material still resting on the seabed. What was inside the crate remains an open question. Some believe it carried medical supplies or vaccines bound for Malta's besieged hospitals. Others, noting the Italian intelligence reports, argue it contained a prototype chemical agent or biological research samples from Porton Down. A minority of historians suggest it may have been radar or code-breaking equipment intended to support Malta's critical intelligence gathering role. Yet the consistency of references to biological cargo across Italian, British, and even American sources suggests something more sinister than spare parts or medicine. The story has no resolution, no formal acknowledgement has ever been made by the British government. Survivors of Operation Harpoon continue to insist the convoy carried something unusual aboard Eagle. Families of those lost at sea remain without answers. Their relatives, deaths bound up in a secrecy that extends beyond wartime necessity. The truth, whatever it may be, lies in sealed Admiralty archives or at the bottom of the Mediterranean, locked in a steel container, silent beneath the waves for over 80 years. Operation Harpoon will always be remembered as a costly attempt to keep Malta alive. But buried within its story is the shadow of something darker, a single silent passenger that never reached its destination, erased from official memory and consigned to the realm of suppressed history. The final months of the Second World War were a chaos of collapsing regimes and contested authority. In Prague, German control dissolved with violence and desperation during May 1945, as Soviet and Czech resistance forces fought to seize the city. By mid-May, with Germany's surrender officially signed, Prague was considered liberated. Yet in July of that year, 2 Czech resistance veterans reported stumbling upon something unexpected: a working German signals post hidden beneath the ruins of Prague Castle, transmitting coded bursts of radio traffic long after the war's official end. The discovery was made during an informal sweep. Members of the pre-war resistance cell, Obrana Naroda, now loosely absorbed into the reconstituted Czechoslovak army, followed reports of unusual electrical activity near the old royal palace. Beneath collapsed masonry, they found a reinforced passage leading to a concealed bunker containing intact shortwave transmitters, generators, and encryption machinery. To their astonishment, the equipment was still operating. Witnesses described hearing the sharp, timed bursts of a high-speed cipher transmission, consistent with German Enigma-based traffic. The operators, 2 uniformed men identified only as Wehrmacht signals officers, were arrested on the spot. Their subsequent disappearance into Soviet custody erased them from any official Czech record. Soviet forces quickly sealed the site. Red Army counterintelligence, the Smersh, took possession of the equipment and transferred the arrested operators to an undisclosed location. The official Czech communiqué of July 1945 made no mention of the discovery. Instead, the incident survived only as a whisper among former resistance fighters, passed down in oral histories and anecdotal accounts. For decades, the existence of a Prague bunker remained rumor until fragments of documentation began surfacing in declassified archives. In 1968, during the brief political thaw of the Prague Spring, a former Czechoslovak army signals officer leaked copies of Soviet reports. These documents, stamped "Soveršenna sekretno," top secret, included translations of intercepted transmissions from the Prague site, which had been logged between 9 and 18 May 1945, days after Germany's surrender. The traffic referenced Wotan, a name not appearing in regular Wehrmacht records. Analysts speculated that Wotan referred to a communications program designed to coordinate post-surrender German units or to activate sleeper networks across Central Europe. The Prague signals appeared to direct certain individuals to exfiltration, routes and extraction corridors leading through Bavaria and into Austria. This suggested the transmissions were not random remnants, but part of an organized evacuation system. OSS files, declassified in the 1990s, corroborate the Soviet material. A 1946 OSS memorandum, titled "Residual Signals in Prague Sector," describes continued coded activity in former German installations and references Soviet unwillingness to share decrypted content. The memorandum warns, possibility exists that transmissions pertain to underground rat line structures. It links the Prague site to German escape networks that later became infamous as the rat lines shuttling Nazi officials to Spain and South America. Though no names are listed, the OSS noted that the Prague broadcasts coincided with the disappearance of several high-ranking Nazi administrators from occupied Bohemia, including SS Oberfuhrer Hans-Ulrich Geschke, last seen in Prague on 9 May 1945, and never conclusively accounted for. The question of how a functioning communications unit could survive inside the heavily bombed and besieged Prague castle complex is difficult to answer. Architectural surveys reveal that beneath the castle lies an extensive network of medieval tunnels and cellars, many reinforced during the German occupation. German engineers had converted parts of this labyrinth into command posts, storage depots, and escape routes. It is plausible that one such chamber was fitted with independent generators and aerial feeds, making it possible to operate even as the city fell around it. The fact that the transmitters were still broadcasting after surrender suggests that orders had been given to continue operations, regardless of Germany's official capitulation. What became of the captured operators is equally murky. Soviet records are silent, but a Czech historian reviewing secret police archives in 1992 found an interrogation card for 2 unidentified Germans, technicians from Prague Castle, dated 1945, marked with the notation, "Forwarded Moscow, do not return." No trial records exist, and their identities remain unknown. This silence fits a broader pattern. Soviet intelligence often absorbed captured German technical personnel into its own apparatus, erasing their existence from public record. The transmissions themselves remain largely undeciphered. Surviving fragments suggest they used Enigma or a derivative cipher system. Soviet codebreakers claimed partial success, but only a handful of phrases survive in translated form. Among them are chilling references: last orders to hold silence, key Wotan not compromised, and departure initiated, rat confirmed. Historians disagree on the meaning of these phrases. Some see them as logistical updates, others as signals that a broader shadow network was activated even as Germany lay in ruins. For Prague itself, the episode has unsettling implications. Was the city being used as a final command relay for an underground Nazi escape plan? Was Wotan a code name for a network designed to preserve key individuals and technologies from Allied hands? Or did the Soviet Union suppress the incident not to bury German crimes, but to exploit captured knowledge for its own purposes during the dawning Cold War? Each possibility underscores the uncertainty of the Prague bunker. Efforts to revisit the site have been systematically blocked. In the 1950s, reconstruction of Prague Castle sealed many underground chambers. Official surveys omit mention of the bunker. Requests to conduct archaeological surveys in the 1990s were denied on grounds of structural safety. Rumors persist that at least part of the communications chamber still exists, sealed behind reinforced walls beneath the old royal palace, its equipment long since removed, but its purpose never officially acknowledged. The Prague Cryptogram network remains one of the most enigmatic footnotes of the war's aftermath. A signals unit operating after surrender, transmissions invoking the codename Wotan, operators who disappeared into Soviet custody. These elements sketch the outline of a covert operation never meant to surface. Whether it was the last gasp of a collapsing Reich or the first moves of a Cold War intelligence appropriation, the story demonstrates how wars do not end neatly on paper. They echo in hidden chambers, coded bursts of static, and files locked away for decades. In Prague, the guns fell silent in May 1945. But beneath the castle stones, the war spoke in cryptograms for days longer, an aftershock in the language of secrets still unresolved. High in the Austrian Salzkammergut, hemmed by sheer cliffs and thick alpine forests, lies Lake Toplitz, a deep, narrow stretch of water long associated with secrecy. During the Nazi era, the region became a stronghold for SS research units and hidden logistics depots. Locals whispered that the lake concealed military experiments, but it was only after the war that fragments of the truth emerged. In 1959, divers discovered bundles of forged British banknotes at the bottom of Toplitz, remnants of Operation Bernhard, the Nazi plan to destabilize the British economy by flooding it with counterfeit sterling. Alongside them, lay crates of equipment and munitions. But the deeper divers went, the more they reported seeing steel containers, torpedo fragments, and most disturbingly, signs of a sealed structure embedded beneath the silted depths. Their accounts hinted not merely at dumped cargo, but at a subterranean facility deliberately constructed and then concealed in the final months of the war. The wartime history of Toplitz is already unsettling. In 1943, the SS established a presence around the lake, overseen by units of the SS Wirtschaftsverwaltungshauptamt, SS Economic and Administrative Main Office. Officially, the area hosted weapons testing. Indeed, the still water was ideal for experimenting with naval charges and rocket propulsion. Local logbooks mention the testing of Seeschlange, sea snake, explosive devices and trial launches of miniature torpedoes. But eyewitness accounts suggest a more elaborate operation. Residents of the village of Gössel at the lake's edge recalled seeing convoys of trucks arriving at night, unloading steel beams, reinforced crates, and unfamiliar machinery. The entrances to the surrounding woods were patrolled by SS guards who turned away civilians. The secrecy exceeded what mere weapons trials would justify. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, US forces entered the Salzkammergut and investigated Toplitz. A report by the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, dated September 1945, describes unusual underwater structures detected via crude sonar sweeps. The report concluded that possible storage or tunnel system existed beneath the lake, but the matter was marked "Defer excavation pending stabilization of zone." Within months, the Soviet Union pressed for access to the area, citing suspicions that advanced naval technology had been hidden there. The Americans resisted. By early 1946, Allied attention shifted elsewhere, and the lake was left undisturbed, at least officially. The story resurfaced in 1959, when German and Austrian divers, financed by a Hamburg news magazine, launched a private expedition. Their aim was to recover evidence of Operation Bernhard. What they found went beyond counterfeit notes. At a depth of nearly 80 meters, they discovered large steel containers, some partially ruptured, others intact, scattered across the lakebed. Several contained technical equipment, parts of experimental rocket propulsion systems, naval mine prototypes, and sealed documents so badly waterlogged as to be unreadable. One diver reported swimming past a structure resembling a steel-reinforced tunnel entrance, partially collapsed and blocked by rubble. According to his account, the entrance was fitted with blast doors, deliberately destroyed from the inside. Before further exploration could take place, Austrian authorities abruptly halted the expedition, citing safety concerns. Within days, the federal government declared Lake Toplitz a restricted site. What motivated such swift intervention remains contested. A leaked Austrian Ministry of Interior memorandum from 1963 suggests the divers had stumbled upon military infrastructure of considerable sensitivity, possible residual ordnance, and strategic materials. An attached US Army Corps of Engineers report, dated the same year, is more explicit. Toplitz evidence indicates presence of constructed tunnel, dimensions sufficient for small craft pen, entry sealed with explosive charges, recommend classification as potential depot of strategic consequence. Yet no excavation followed. Requests for further dives were denied, often under the guise of environmental protection. Speculation mounted that the Toplitz bunker was intended as a storage site for advanced weapons or research archives. Some researchers connect it to the SS Sonderkommando under Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, which in 1944 began relocating sensitive projects from bombed German cities into remote alpine locations. Others believe the lake was tied to the Reich's last-ditch naval innovations, mini-submarines, acoustic torpedoes, or even experimental propulsion units. The presence of torpedo fragments recovered in 1959 supports this. More provocative theories suggest the bunker was designed to store cultural loot or gold reserves, though official investigations have found no proof. Still, the persistence of forged currency on the lakebed indicates Toplitz was at least part of a financial deception operation, one that may have masked other activities. Why then has the lake remained so aggressively off-limits? In 1983, Austrian television prepared a documentary on Toplitz, arranging for divers to revisit the depths. On the eve of filming, their permits were revoked. The Ministry of Defense cited unexploded ordnance hazard, yet archival requests reveal correspondence with NATO officials warning against destabilizing revelations concerning wartime deposits. The implication, whatever lies beneath Toplitz has relevance beyond historical curiosity, potentially involving Cold War-era intelligence interests. Some researchers point to the US and Soviet scramble after 1945 to capture German technology. Projects such as Operation Paperclip demonstrated how both powers sought not only scientists, but their archives. If Toplitz indeed housed experimental material, both sides may have quietly retrieved what they needed, while leaving the broader public in the dark. Supporting this are anecdotal reports from local villagers in the late 1940s of foreign military trucks parked near the lake at night, long after official interest had supposedly ended. The physical characteristics of Toplitz make it a near-perfect vault. The lake plunges to depths over 100 meters, with layers of oxygen-deprived water that preserve metals and paper far longer than normal. Sediment builds quickly, entombing objects in anaerobic layers. If a bunker or sealed depot was constructed into the surrounding rock, it could easily remain hidden for centuries. Divers in the 1990s again reported seeing anomalous sonar returns, suggesting hollow spaces beneath the southern cliff face. Once more, permission to investigate was denied. What, precisely, remains beneath Lake Toplitz is therefore unresolved. The official narrative limits the site to Operation Bernhard forgeries and discarded military equipment. Yet multiple classified reports, diver testimonies, and government interventions suggest a larger infrastructure, a bunker built for concealment, destroyed to prevent capture, and then quietly ignored by post-war authorities who may already have harvested its secrets. Whether it held advanced naval technology, hidden archives, or something more politically volatile, the truth has been consistently sealed beneath layers of water, sediment, and official silence. Lake Toplitz today is placid, its surface reflecting alpine peaks. Tourists wander its shores unaware of the stories buried below, but for those who have examined the scattered files and testimonies, the lake remains less a scenic site than a locked archive, an underwater vault of secrets where the final ambitions of the Third Reich still rest, unreachable and perhaps deliberately kept so. At the end of the Second World War, the atrocities of Japan's Unit 731 were quietly buried under layers of secrecy. Based in Harpoon, Manchuria, the unit had carried out grotesque experiments on prisoners, vivisections without anesthesia, frostbite, trials, and the deliberate release of plague, cholera, and anthrax. By August 1945, as the Soviet Red Army advanced, Unit 731 destroyed its laboratories, executed remaining captives, and attempted to erase its tracks. While a few members were tried by the Soviets in the Khabarovsk trials of 1949, the majority of its personnel vanished into post-war obscurity. The reason was a deal. US intelligence granted immunity to leading figures like General Shiro Ishii in exchange for their research data, later catalogued at Fort Detrick, Maryland. What has remained less discussed is how the shadows of Unit 731 resurfaced, not in Japan, but on the battlefields of Korea a few years later. In January 1951, United Nations troops advancing through the Korean peninsula encountered outbreaks of plague-like infections in villages recently abandoned by Chinese and North Korean forces. Officially, these were attributed to poor sanitation and wartime disruption, yet internal reports from the US 8th Army Medical Section, declassified decades later, describe symptomology consistent with artificially disseminated pathogens. The outbreaks followed suspicious patterns, isolated incidents in strategic zones rather than natural spread. Investigators noted the sudden appearance of fleas and unusual rodent die-offs, reminiscent of Unit 731's known techniques for plague dissemination in Manchuria. CIA memoranda from the same year, stamped Eyes only reference an operation under the cryptic heading Paperclip East. These files suggest that Soviet forces had seized surviving Unit 731 specialists during their Manchurian advance, transporting them through Dalian into North Korea. Among the names tentatively listed is Dr. Masaji Kitano, Ishii's deputy, though official Japanese records claim he remained in Tokyo under US protection. The memoranda warn of red exploitation of Ishii protocols and field deployment risk. In effect, US intelligence feared that the very knowledge it had bargained to secure from Unit 731 was being replicated by Soviet-backed programs in the Korean theater. Testimonies from defectors add weight to the suspicion. In the late 1950s, 2 North Korean medical officers, interrogated after fleeing to the south, described a program referred to internally as Honglan, Red Orchid. According to their statements, Japanese-speaking advisors supervised training in biological dispersal methods, culturing bacilli, preparing ceramic bombs similar to those used in China, and coordinating with frontline units for tactical release. While the defectors could not provide physical proof, their technical descriptions matched methods documented in Soviet transcripts of the Khabarovsk trials. The implication was clear. Fragments of Unit 731 had survived, transplanted into the Korean conflict under a new banner. For the civilian population, the effects were devastating, but ambiguous. Outbreaks of cholera and typhus were common in wartime, Korea blurring the line between natural disease and deliberate attack. Yet several UN field surgeons recorded anomalies, villages reporting simultaneous infections across dispersed households, children presenting with symptoms uncommon to endemic strains, and isolated areas where rodents seemed to appear in unnatural abundance. One Australian medical officer noted in his diary, "Not famine, not filth. This is placement." His report, submitted to the UN command, was classified and never included in public records of the war. The geopolitical context further complicated disclosure. By 1952, accusations of biological warfare had become a propaganda weapon. North Korea and China accused the United States of using biological agents. Washington vehemently denied it. In this climate, any suggestion that communist forces might themselves be deploying pathogens derived from Japanese war crimes was politically inconvenient. The existence of Red Orchid, if real, undermined both sides' narratives, exposing Soviet complicity in reviving crimes it had publicly condemned and highlighting the West's failure to prevent the spread of knowledge it had secretly purchased. Evidence of the continuation program surfaces again in 1969, when a classified State Department cable, later leaked, summarized intelligence from South Korean sources about Japanese-trained biological cadre active in DPRK laboratories. The cable noted that Soviet advisors appeared to have withdrawn by the mid-1950s, leaving North Korea with an indigenous program. The phrase "legacy of Harbin" was underlined in the text. No follow-up investigations were authorized, but the implication was stark. Unit 731's work had not only survived, but taken root in a new geopolitical arena. The human element is perhaps most haunting. Prisoners of war held by North Korea later described interrogations that included questions about resistance to cholera, frostbite endurance, and susceptibility of Western troops to insect-carried plague. These questions echoed the macabre experiments once conducted in Manchuria. While such testimonies remain circumstantial, their consistency across separate POW accounts suggests that the methodology of Unit 731 lingered far beyond 1945. To this day, the full scope of Red Orchid, or whether it truly existed, remains locked. Behind closed archives in Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang, Western governments, having themselves silenced Unit 731's crimes to exploit its data, have shown little interest in public inquiry. The result is a historical vacuum where atrocity and denial coexist. What is certain is that the scientific legacy of Unit 731 did not vanish with Japan's surrender. It was scattered, some fragments absorbed by the United States, others captured by the Soviets, and at least some carried into the Korean War, where they resurfaced in outbreaks too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Unit 731 has often been described as Japan's darkest secret, But the shadow it cast was longer than most realize. The crimes of Harpoon were not only a tragedy of the past, they echoed in the fever wards of Korea, whispered in defectors' testimonies, and linger still in classified files marked with code words like Paperclip East and Red Orchid. The world may never know the full extent of what was unleashed. Yet in the cold bureaucratic language of intelligence reports and the haunted recollections of survivors, one fact remains clear. The war's end did not end the crimes. It scattered them, hidden within the machinery of a new conflict, where secrecy and denial once again proved more powerful than truth. The files close, but the silence does not. In forgotten vaults and flooded bunkers, machines still hum, signals still echo, and shadows remain loyal to no flag. What was hidden was never meant to rest, only to wait. And somewhere between fact and erasure, truth lingers like smoke in a sealed room, undeniable, poisonous, and unfinished. The war may have ended on paper, but its secrets are still moving, just beyond the reach of light.